So first of all, that's false. Even the Israeli military hasn't claimed it was ammunition. There's a debate about what the secondary explosions caused. It could have been the gas cylinders that people were using. But the issue is you're bombing areas of tents and hospitals. You've bombed refugee camps, as Piers pointed out. You've bombed schools. As I've pointed out, and you've dodged, you bombed a Lebanese Christian town and killed 23 people from one family, including 2 babies. You've bombed UN peacekeeping soldiers from Ireland and Italy who are not Hamas or Hezbollah either. Israel is bombing people deliberately. We don't need your word for that. We've seen hundreds of TikToks, including my company, Zateo, that you happily mentioned earlier, put out an entire documentary interviewing Israeli soldiers and showing the TikToks of them bragging about their violence inside of Gaza and now Lebanon. You talk about low-hanging fruit. Let's just be clear here on the facts, since people are not going to get the facts because as you've read my book, you know there's a tactic called gish galloping, which is what you just did, which is to talk over all the facts without engaging with them. Here are the facts that people can go look up for themselves. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the UN Human Rights Office, UNICEF, UNHCR, Save the Children, World Food Programme, WHO, Doctors Without Borders. I can keep going. Refugees International, International Rescue, they all, Care International, Christian Aid, Physicians for Human Rights. They all say the Israeli military is to blame for the casualties, for the killing of innocent people, for not giving warnings, for bombing civilian targets, and for starving the people of northern Gaza. Right now, Save the Children say that northern Gaza looks like the depths of hell. The World Food Programme says no food has been allowed in by your government.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Zees Political Couch. In this free exchange, Mehdi Hasan doesn't just bring receipts, he brings the entire filing cabinet. Facing off with Jonathan, a former IDF soldier turned PR guru, Mehdi dives headfirst into facts with precision of a surgeon and the flair of a stand-up comic. As Jonathan tries to dance around the issues, Hassan keeps the pressure on, armed with reports from the UN, Amnesty International, and what feels like the entire cast of NGOs. And the reality, it's not looking good for Jonathan's defense team. Between TikToks of soldiers begging and the mountain of evidence from human rights group, Hassan paints a picture that's as grim as it is undeniable. But hey, at least Jonathan gets points for effort, right? With his characteristic wit, Hassan weaves humor into this otherwise heavy conversation, makes sure that while the topic is serious, the takedown is still entertaining. If Jonathan thought he could waltz through this unscathed, he probably didn't expect Mehdi Hasan to be leading the dance. Let's dive in.
And your military since the start of October. And by the way, one last point. You mentioned, oh, maybe 10 soldiers did this, 10 soldiers did that. Actually, according to the UN, this stuff is systematic. And I would ask you asked me who my investors are. I'll ask you. You were in the Israeli military. You proudly said you were a combatant. Someone asked you, were you involved in the things the Israeli military is being accused of by the International Criminal Court chief prosecutor, by human rights groups, intentional killing of civilians, starving of civilians, the use of rape and sexual violence against detainees, using Palestinian children as human shields, as the New York Times reported this week? Did you do any of that when you were in your service, Jonathan Conricus?
None of that is correct. None of that is correct, and I will gladly address
all correct.
each and
the
every
issue is,
one
did
of
you
them.
do it?
Of course, you know very well that we don't have time to go into a serious discussion of each and every of those flat allegations that you're rattling off as if you say them fast, it makes it true, and as if you wave a few names of questionable organizations, it makes it true.
Very slow.
No. You don't. No. Mehdi, I didn't interrupt. Let's keep it that way. I really refrain from interrupting. Let's keep it that way. It makes for better discussion. Even though I think you've said many things that are horrible, and you rattled off lots of names of organizations that, frankly, most people around the world, many people around the world, have lost their faith in, think are uncredible. You mentioned organizations that have been shown that they are full of BDS supporters and Israel haters that have 2 jobs in BDS organizations and in these so-called humanitarian organizations. But you know what? Let's not go the easy way. Let's say I take you up on each and every one of those points, and I will say very clearly, whenever the IDF finds out wrongdoing, it takes measures against the people who have done wrong. And it's a very challenging thing to do when a country is fighting for its very existence on at least 7 fronts, when its soldiers are being forced to fight for more than a year in order to defend their homes and their families, and then to simultaneously have these soldiers called in for disciplinary procedures and to be investigated while we are fighting. That isn't an easy thing to do, but yet the IDF does it. Not because the likes of you or others matter, but because this is who we are as a people who want to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and continue fighting the day after this end. And
right,
we will end this war. This war will eventually end.
Jonathan, let me ask you a question.
Yes,
I want to try and just move to a different sort of theme with this. how does all this end? I mean, what is Israel's plan for the end game here? Because to many people, it looks like you're just going to war with everyone now in the region. It could escalate massively. And if you replicate what you've done in Gaza with what you now do in, say, the Lebanon, where does that leave everybody? I mean, most of Gaza has been leveled. Tens of thousands of innocent people killed in the process of going after Hamas. If this is replicated in anything like this scale in the Lebanon, you've got vast areas just destroyed. What happens afterwards? And why would you assume that this tactic of going so aggressively after Hamas and Hezbollah in civilian areas is not just going to fuel the ideology that led to them rising up in the way that they did in the first place?
Yeah. Well, going after an enemy aggressively, that's what war is. When you're attacked in your home, when your women are slaughtered, when babies are killed, when women are raped, and when your civilians are burnt alive and people are taken hostage, that's called a declaration of war. And you fight that. You don't fight it by being nice, and you don't fight it by being gentle. You do fight it according to the laws of armed conflict, and you try to adhere to those criteria. By and large, I think that Israel is succeeding. Sure, there have been mistakes, and sure, there are things that weren't 100% right, but I think that by and large, and that's, by the way, many British and American officers have attested to that as well. Those have been able to see the battlefield. But where does this go from here? Sadly, and I live here, and my kids will serve in the military, and I will probably do more reserves. I think that we're in for a long battle. I think that we're in for more fighting. I look around and I listen. I try to listen, and I speak Arabic, and I try to listen to the sounds and people that are willing to say and acknowledge that the Jews have a right to live and exist here. I try to hear those voices amongst Palestinians, Arabs, Syrians, Lebanese, and others in the region. And sadly, I don't hear them enough. And I regret to say this, but I think that what is in store sadly for Israel, and I would want for that to be totally different. I would want for us to focus on economy and research and culture, and to do many beautiful things that we do in Israel, and we do them very well, much to the displeasure of our enemies, but nevertheless we do them. And I would want for us to focus on that. But sadly, we're being forced to defend ourselves, and we weren't doing anything that is similar to what's going on now on the 6th of October.
Okay.
And just to end, I will say that, just one sentence, Piers, the next step is indeed Iran. And I think that we will have a conversation in a few months from now, maybe 4 or 5 months, where you can ask this question again, after Israel will directly engage the Islamic Republic of Iran and start to shift the tide in the region. We won't have Iran funding and amassing these terrorist organizations against us. That will be the beginning of a much quieter and more peaceful Middle East.
Okay. Mehdi, your response.
Yeah, I've got a lot to respond because a lot was said.
Yeah.
Let me just deal with the first point, this nonsense about October the 6th. It was all peaceful. Gazans were being killed on October 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd. West Bankers were being killed on October 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd. It's a complete lie that there was some kind of peace or quiet in the neighborhood. Maybe in Israel there was, but people were still bearing the brunt of occupation violence in both the West Bank and Gaza. It's a total and utter lie to suggest otherwise. It's also interesting that Jonathan responded to your question, Piers, by talking about how, and I think I'm quoting him correctly, that when you come into our homes and you kill our civilians and you rape our women and you set us on fire, that is a declaration of war. Which is ironic because he's just described everything that Israel has done in Gaza and the West Bank, both in recent weeks and months and over the years of occupation. So how come it's not a declaration of war for Palestinians when Israel does it to the Palestinians? It's only one-way traffic. Only one side has a right to defend itself, right? Not the other side. Number two, I would just say, he talked again about kind of, oh, there were too many names and I speak too fast. Let me just be clear. I can speak very, very slowly. One issue, rape. He lies and tells your viewers that Israeli soldiers are held to account. That's not true. Anyone can go on Google right now and look at the number of Israeli soldiers, the percentage who are actually indicted or charged with any crimes. It's 98, 99% of Israeli soldiers are never charged with any crimes. And that's from B'Tselem, that's from Israeli human rights groups. I'm sure Jonathan will call them anti-Semites as well. And when we look at one single instance of rape in detention, which was well documented by the Israeli media and by human rights groups and actual Palestinian eyewitnesses, what happened? The Israeli military police, Piers, went to the base to try and arrest the soldiers. The soldiers ganged together, attacked the military police, And then the parliament had a debate about whether rape should be legal or not, whether it's legal to rape Palestinian detainees. And now we're learning this week, Piers, that the military police officers who were assaulted by the soldiers who were the buddies of the rapists, are too scared to give testimony against their soldiers because they're worried about repercussions.
Mehdi, I don't disagree with you.
I don't know. Hold on, Piers.
No, I want to ask you one question.
That is very important that we talk about accountability.
I know. I've got one supplementary.
I will answer your question, but I'm going to finish my.
But on the issue of
Piers,
rape,
I'll come.
Okay, on that one issue of rape, though, what I haven't heard you mention at all is the hideous sexual abuse, including rape, of so many innocent women.
Because we all condemn that.
On October the 7th. Well, no, but I'm asking you now, you haven't mentioned it. And Jonathan's raised that several times. You only seem fixated.
Why would I? Because
you're fixated with Israeli soldiers who may have committed rape. What about the rape against Israelis?
Piers, if you want to do a debate like that, invite Jonathan Conricus and invite a Hamas spokesperson. I'm sorry, I'm not a spokesman for Hamas. I've condemned Hamas. Unlike Jonathan, I condemn people who engage in human rights abuses.
I did it.
Hold on. Well, I've done it. Well, maybe you should pay attention, Jonathan. Instead of reading my book, check everything I've said on the conflict. I was condemning Hamas decades ago, and I've been attacked by...
Jonathan's response is a dazzling display of double standards, wrapped in a cloak of indignation and sprinkled with deflections. When Mehdi Hasan points out the systematic abuses reported by human rights organizations and the UN, Jonathan's reflexes dismissal is almost comedic, and his predictability. And he waves away well-documented allegations of war crimes as flat allegations from questionable organizations, conveniently ignoring the mountain of evidence backing these claims. It's the classic, if I say it's fast enough, it's not real, defense, less of a rebuttal and more of a desperate dodgeball move. Mr. Piers Morgan, in the moment of journalistic myopia, poses a both sides question that borders on the absurd, as if the question isn't glaringly obvious. His fixation on making Mehdi comment on Hamas atrocity when Mehdi is already condemned is a textbook case of false equivalency. It's like asking someone why they're not condemning arsonists while they're pointing out the fire brigade's misconduct. Mehdi's response is razor sharp, slicing through the charades with the precision of a skilled orator who's seen the playbook one too many times. The humor lies in the absurdity of it all. Jonathan attempts to paint the Israeli military as paragons of accountability while conveniently glossing over the 98 to 99% of soldiers who are never charged despite overwhelming evidence of misconduct. It's like claiming to be model student while consistently flunking all your exams. Mehdi, with his blend of wit and facts, exposes the hypocrisy, leaving the audience with a clear picture of double standards at play. The irony is as thick as Jonathan's attempt to justify actions that, if reversed, he would undoubtedly classify as declarations of war.
People for condemning Hamas. Can I finish a point? You gave a long speech.
Yeah, you can.
So far, you and Piers have both interrupted me.
Yeah, you can.
I'm going to answer this point. If you want to have a Hamas spokesman, have a Hamas spokesman. I did an entire show. We keep mentioning Zeteo. I'm loving the plugs, Piers. Appreciate you. On Zeteo, people can go and watch an entire show I did with Bassem Youssef, another one of your guests, where I talked about on that show about how the UN report talked about gender and sexual violence on October the 7th, how that needs to be prosecuted, how it needs to be investigated. And you know what the UN said? They said, we haven't been able to confirm instances of rape, but we want to, but the Israelis are blocking us from interviewing witnesses and coming into Israel. So maybe Jonathan should get his government to allow UN investigators to finish the job, because I believe all rapists should be held to account. Jonathan doesn't. He hasn't said a word. I brought it up several times. He said, oh, it's a few men here and there. No. They're not being prosecuted. The Israeli parliament defended them. The Israeli media had debates about whether rape should be legalized. That is the military he's part of. He earlier, in a very racist way, suggested, I have no civilization, no country, no loyalty except to Qatar and Iran. I'm a British American of Indian descent. I have nothing to do with Iran or Qatar. I would say this, that Jonathan needs to deal with those human rights abuses. And finally, the last point I'll make, you keep going on about, oh, these groups are not taken seriously. Jonathan Conricus, Piers, wants you and your viewers to disbelieve Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, UNICEF, UNHCR, Refugees International, International Rescue, Christian Aid. Disbelieve all those groups. Disbelieve the World Food Programme run by Cindy McCain, the late widow of John McCain. Disbelieve all of them and believe the Israeli military, which he was a spokesman for, which was caught lying about beheaded babies, about calendars in the bottom of hospitals, about Lebanese documentaries, the number of the Israeli military lies that they've had to own up to. It's a joke. No one trusts anything Jonathan's saying.
All right, Jonathan, final word to you.
Yeah, actually, many people do trust what I and my peers say. And many people, I think, listen to the kind of thing, the kind of goods that you peddle, Mehdi. And the goods that you peddle are Israel hatred. Sometimes it's more sophisticated and more well-founded. Sometimes it's very easy to dismantle. And it's very clear where you stand. I asked you before, and you conveniently didn't answer. What is it that you stand for? What do you represent? What
Human
are
rights,
the values that you
dignity,
stand
equality,
for? Right.
not rape and war
If it's
crimes
human
like you
rights
stand
and
for.
dignity and equality, then I suggest that you stand equally and speak about how they're violated by the oppressive Iranian regime against the Iranian people. Speak about what the Syrian dictator does against
Iran.
his people.
I've criticized
Speak
Qatar.
about
You
how
won't criticize Israel.
Hamas
That's the
brutalizes 2 million Gazans and how
criticized
Hezbollah
Hamas.
deals
And I've
with
criticized the Israeli
dissenters in
military.
Lebanon.
You won't
The
criticize
problem
Israel.
with what you're
The only
saying,
person here,
the
Jonathan,
problem
who
with
won't
what you're
criticize their
doing,
side is
Mehdi,
you.
the
Not me.
problem with what you are doing, Mehdi, is that
honest.
it's very easy to listen to you less, even though you speak eloquently and you have good sources. It's easy to listen to you less and believe to you less because it's very clear what you're motivated by. You are not something that is motivated by a true care for human beings. You care about human beings
Yes, it is.
if
That's
the
why I
ones who
support
cause
Israeli
them
innocent lives as
injustice
well.
or something else
Which your
are
government is endangering.
Israelis. If it's Palestinians killed by Palestinians, then
Jonathan,
that's a non-story.
if I had my
it's
way,
Hamas
Israelis
that
wouldn't be
oppresses
dying right now.
Palestinians, you don't
Israelis
care.
are dying right now
No, if
because of
it's-
your
if
government.
If it's suffering anywhere
Israelis
else,
died.
and if it cannot
Israelis
be
are dying
pinned on
because of
Israel,
your government.
even
I don't
by
want
your
Israelis to
warped
die.
logic,
I don't
then
want
you
anyone
don't
to
care
die.
about it.
You do.
only care about it if it's related to
That's a
Israel
lie.
and if it can serve
That's a lie.
anti-Israeli propaganda. And that undermines your credibility. You speak about my
I've criticized
credibility. I'm
Saudi
very
Arabia.
easy and open, and it's
You're
very
just lying,
clear.
Jonathan.
I
You've got
stand
nothing
for my
left.
country, and I'm happy to defend it. But
Can you
what you
criticize
stand
Israel?
for is just attacking Israel. Of course, I can criticize, and I even do it on my Twitter.
Just.
I've said things about
No, you haven't done
my
it. You
prime
haven't done
minister,
it
and
one
I've
time
said
today. You
things
couldn't
about
even
my
criticize mass
military.
rape.
Of course, I have.
You couldn't even criticize mass rape by your fellow soldiers.
Listen, there hasn't
even do
been
that.
mass rape. It's such a
Shameful,
It's such a
Jonathan.
nonsense talking
You
point.
should be
Mehdi.
ashamed of yourself.
It's such a nonsense talking point, so I won't even.
So the
credit
UN's
it
lying,
with
the New York
acknowledging
Times
it.
is lying,
It is
CNN is lying.
The UN isn't
Wow.
saying it.
Everyone's
the UN
lying,
isn't saying it. The
except
fact
you
that
and
you
the Israeli
mentioned an
military.
organization name
Actually,
doesn't
the
make
UN
it true.
Commission of
Mehdi.
Inquiry last week.
Chaps,
UN Commission of Inquiry.
it
I'm going to
hasn't.
call a
No, it
timeout.
hasn't.
because we-
Everyone can Google it, Jonathan.
As we conclude, real quickly, the double standards in Zionist Jonathan's arguments are glaring. He quickly disrespects and discredits global organizations while demanding unquestionable belief in the Israeli military's account. Despite their history of misinformation, Mehdi Hasan effectively dismantles this hypocrisy, emphasizing the accountability and justice must be universal, not selective. Here at Zees Political Couch, we're committed to exposing those contradictions and delivering unfiltered fact-based analysis. Stay with us for more insight, debates, and fearless commentary. As always, please share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, hope to see you all there.